Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bankruptcy Judge Scott Grossman from the Southern District of Florida in the Fort Lauderdale Division. I would like to welcome everybody this afternoon to the Florida Bar Business Law Section's Mental Health First Aid CLE series, mental health issues in those around us. And for this afternoon, I would like to introduce our two speakers, Dr. Kristin Jones and attorney Deneen Waslik. Dr. Jones is a licensed mental health counselor practicing in Miami, Florida. She holds a doctoral degree in health science, a master's degree in mental health counseling, and a bachelor's degree in psychology. She specializes in the treatment of eating disorders, anxiety disorders, borderline personality disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Dr. Jones is the founder of Jones Therapy and Coaching, through which she provides online mindful living coaching programs, individualized coaching programs, and online or in-person therapy services. Deneen Waslik is the co-chair of the Health and Wellness Task Force of the Business Law Section. Her practice focuses on intellectual property and appeals throughout Florida. With that, I will turn it over to Dr. Jones and Ms. Waslik for the program. Go ahead.
Thanks, Judge.
Thank you, Judge, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we are going to be addressing, so our previous CLEs, if you have been here for them, we've been addressing how do you deal with really your own mental health challenges? How do you deal with distressing mental health challenges? And then how do you deal with everyday emotions? This time, we're going to be talking about how do we identify when there are mental health problems in other people and how do we address those problems? So today we're going to be discussing signs that a person may be struggling with mental health. We're going to discuss how to address those concerns. We're also going to talk about how do you de-escalate a difficult situation, especially when there are high intensity emotions at play. And finally, Deneen Waslik will be discussing knowing how to report colleagues and how to do so ethically if necessary. So let's start by first talking about just some common symptoms when it comes to mental health problems. Know that this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just some common symptoms that do arise. Now, when we're looking at some of these symptoms, these are things that can kind of come up with everyday stress, everyday challenges. But what we're really looking for is a large increase, a spike in these kinds of problems, these symptoms, or a major shift, just something that is out of the ordinary. And we're looking at, are these problems causing significant interference with social, occupational, or other functioning? So some of these symptoms may be excessive worry or fear, especially when it's starting to really interfere with work or social functioning, excessive sadness, feeling low, confused thinking, difficulty concentrating, mood changes, irritability, increased anger, avoidance behavior, especially with social or friends, feeling tired, low energy, sleep changes. So sleep changes are often a sign of a mental health problem. So that would be insomnia, sleeping too little, or hypersomnia, sleeping too much. Difficulty perceiving reality. This is often a sign of a more severe mental health problem. This may be delusions, hallucinations, a person senses or experiences something that doesn't actually exist. And also lack of insight. This is something to be really attuned to. Often, especially when things are more severe, people can often have difficulty perceiving that their behavior or their emotional challenges are in fact a problem. Overuse of substances, and also physical ailments. So if there are excessive physical ailments, especially without any kind of known medical cause, that can point to a psychological problem. Obviously, thinking and planning suicide, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. That is a more concerning symptom. Inability to carry out daily activities or handle daily life stress. intense fear of weight gain, or overwhelming concern about appearance, changes in eating habits, and changes in sex drive. So all of these things could point to a mental health problem. Now, these are some more high-risk symptoms that, to be aware of. One is obviously suicidality. So this is thoughts, planning, talking about suicide. This is something that we want to take seriously. I guess, again, I'm going to address that a little bit more in just a minute. Self-harm. So if there is self-harm or self-harm urges, talking about harming others, excessive hopelessness or feeling like a burden to people. This is often a major call for concern, especially feeling like people would be better off without them. That's definitely a major cause for concern. Difficulty perceiving reality, significant difficulties with what we call activities of daily living, ADLs. So this is with basic kind of self-care, feeding, hygiene, dressing, toileting, basic care for self. Excessive substance use, especially with excessive negative consequences, and food, negative food behaviors like restricting and binging and purging, or excessive use of diuretics, laxatives, or diet pills. So when we notice these in others, I think that we have all probably experienced or noticed somebody struggling, but knowing how to address them is often very perplexing and challenging. So I wanted to share with you just a few tips on how to do this. This is not exhaustive. This is not a detailed training of how to do this, but I want to give you some guidance on how to open up that conversation. So expressing concern about mental health. The number one thing to do when we want to express concern is to do so in a calm and non-judgmental manner. So, for example, I've noticed that you seem a bit down or on edge, irritable, anxious lately. How have you been doing? Let me know if you need to talk. Right? So we want to just be open, calm, confident when we give this information and open up this conversation. We want to be a good listener with what they have to say, showing validation and compassion. So that means showing understanding for their struggle and taking their struggle seriously. I'm going to talk in a little bit more about how to do that effectively and why that is so important. And we want to really refrain from trying to immediately swoop in and fix whatever's happening or immediately trying to make them feel better, even though that can be a really natural tendency. Again, in a minute, I'm going to talk about why that can actually sometimes make things worse and not really help the situation. And, we want to ask how we can be of help instead of assuming how we can help. And then we want to follow up. So we can have a conversation, and maybe the first time you speak to somebody, they don't open up, they don't respond. They may say that there is not a problem, but then we can follow up a week or two later or whenever it seems appropriate. Now, when we're talking about addressing danger to self or others, this can be a really challenging, situation. It's very difficult to have this conversation. This is obviously not a conversation that you would have with, somebody who you're not very close to. But if you are concerned, especially if somebody is a significant person in your life, or a close colleague, client, asking about suicide will not make somebody suicidal. So a lot of times there's a fear of asking about suicide in general, because we feel that's going to put that idea into somebody's head, but that's not actually the case. And most people will not really bring that up unless they're asked. And starting to open up that conversation can often help them. And it can lead to a conversation where you can encourage that person to get the help that they need. Taking somebody's comments seriously is important about self-harm or suicide. And we actually now have, probably most of you know this, but we have a suicide and crisis lifeline here that's the 988. So it's instead of needing to call 911 when there's an emergency, somebody who is feeling suicidal can call 988 and get support. So that's a great resource. And then obviously, if there is a major threat, if you feel like somebody or someone else is at significant risk, then call 911. Now, I'm going to give a little bit more guidelines, a little bit more detail about how we can go about addressing concerns with other people. And one thing that we want to include when we are addressing these concerns is give skills. So the give skills, this is part of dialectical behavior therapy. That's a type of therapy that I specialize in. But these give skills are ways that we can really help and support a relationship that's very important to us. So often when we are bringing up concerns about somebody's mental health, it's with somebody who is an important person in our lives. So we want to make sure that we're maintaining that relationship. And also using these skills tends to help people to be much more receptive to what you have to say. So this is gentle. So we want to be gentle in our approach. So that means we want to refrain from criticism, attacks, blaming, things like that. And we want to just gently share our concerns. We want to act interested. So once we do share, we want to listen to what they have to say. And then we want to validate those concerns, showing understanding for the struggle that they're going through. And finally, using an easy manner. So if at all possible, trying to use as easy a manner as possible. So that means, not needing to, at least initially, be very, very serious when we're, first bringing up our concerns. We can start with, just kind of like a more easy, natural, relaxed manner initially. Now, dear man, so this is a formula that we use in dialectical behavior therapy. And this is really a formula for how you can express something. So we can use this when we're asking for something or we're saying no to something. And we can also use this when expressing concern, especially if part of that concern is asking the person to do something. And what this formula does is it really sets up your initial expression and your ask in a way that's going to make the person more receptive to what you have to say. So the dear portion is your initial, communication with the person, you really sharing the situation, your feelings, what you want to ask the person for, and what's in it for them. And then the man part is, how do you respond to the person after you have made that initial response? So what this does is it really breaks down the conversation. So the first piece that we want to do is describe the situation. So we want to describe the current situation that we are in factually. So we want to keep it short. We want to keep it simple, 2 sentences. We really want to keep it, not more than that. So an example in this scenario is, I've been noticing some changes in your mood lately. You've been appearing down. So we're setting up the conversation. We're telling them exactly what we are communicating about. And the next part is express. So this is where we tell our opinions and our feelings about the situation. So when we're expressing, we want to use words like I feel, I think, I want, instead of you should, you make me feel, I can't. So we want to really avoid blaming types of statements and really own our own thoughts and opinions about the situation. So the example here, I care about you and feel concerned. I wanted to let you know that I'm here to talk if you need, right? So I'm sharing that I'm concerned. And then the assert part. So this is directly asking for something or saying no if that is the situation. We want to be very clear with this and not assume that the other person will just know what we're asking for. So the example in this scenario, even if you don't want to talk to me, if you're struggling, there are people who can help. Please reach out. So the assert is reach out. And then finally, reinforce. You're telling the other person what's in it for them. You're describing negative and positive consequences, obviously without making threats, but you're telling them why they should do this thing. You want to make the person feel good about what you're suggesting beforehand. So an example here is if you're struggling, getting support can be really helpful. So we're setting this up for the other person. Now, the main part of this is how do we respond after we have made that initial set of statements? Because sometimes we can get defensiveness, irritability, we can have people to shut down, things like that. So when we make this first initial statement, we want to make sure that we stay mindful and focused on the objective. So in this case, the objective is, getting the person to reach out for help, whether it's to talk to you or to, reach out to a mental health professional. Now, let's say that the person begins to become defensive, starts attacking. I can't believe that you're saying this. Look at all the problems that you have, or look at all the stress I'm under. Or they start making threats, or they start trying to change the subject. What we want to do if that happens is not take that bait. We don't want to engage with what they're saying. We want to ignore it, and we want to broken record coming back. So we can say, I see that what I said has upset you. I understand that. And I'm just asking that you get help if you need it. So we keep coming back to our objective, and we don't engage with any attacks, threats, or attempts to change the subject. When we say this, we want to appear confident, even if we don't feel it. So the more that we can stay calm and confident, the more that person is going to be at ease. So this also means not being aggressive and overly direct with this, but we also don't want to be passive, with head down. We don't want to be apologizing, looking at the floor, saying, I'm not sure. We want to be secure in what we're saying. And then finally, in this case, it might not really pertain to what we're talking about. In just a minute, when we talk about de-escalating difficult situations, this will be more relative to that, relevant, to that. But basically, the N is for negotiate. So be willing to give to get. So we can offer an alternative. So if that person, for example, here you're offering, would you like to talk sometime? An alternative may be, could I give you the number of a mental health professional, with whom you could talk? You can reduce your request, and you can turn the table. So, I see that you're not wanting to listen to what I'm suggesting. What do you think that we should do here? So you're getting the other person to come up with some alternatives. Okay, so that's kind of the formula for an ask and some tips on the ask. I wanted to spend some time today really talking about validation, because when it comes to mental health and knowing how to communicate with somebody who maybe is having a mental health challenge or just going through a challenging emotion, learning how to validate is one of the most effective things that you can do, not only to help them quiet the emotions, but also to maintain the relationship with that person. So I wanted to start with a little video. It's a little bit silly, but I find that it really kind of shows what validation is about.
It's just, there's all this pressure, and sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. That's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail.
See, you're listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. All of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you.
Oh, come on, if you would just
Don't.
out of face, Mom.
Okay, so I love that video because I feel that it's such a great example of what a lot of us do during interactions. When somebody is struggling, I think a lot of times our natural tendency is to jump in and try to fix it, try to solve it. And often what happens with that is the person feels invalidated. They don't feel heard. And because the emotional part of the brain is really the strongest part of our brain, when it is activated, it becomes really difficult for someone to be able to, fix and problem solve. Often we need to speak to that emotional part of the brain first to allow that emotion to quiet. We need to do that before we start to offer solutions or try to problem solve. So validation is one of the most important things that we can do to initially de-escalate a situation or to help somebody who is struggling emotionally. And as you saw in the video, the moment that the man offered that validation, wow, I see that that's really hard. You saw the woman's emotion just reduce and settle, right? And we see what happens when he didn't, when he was going in for the solutions to try to fix it. It often tends to actually escalate the emotion, intensify it. So what is validation? So validation is acknowledging that another person's emotions, thoughts, or behaviors are real and understandable given their experiences, their history, or their biology. So it's really looking to find the kernel of truth in what that person is saying. It is not agreeing, liking, or praise. So a lot of people have this idea that if I validate and show understanding, it means that I'm approving of this person. But really what we're doing is trying to find, that element of what they're experiencing that is understandable, that is real, that does make sense. And the things that we can validate within other people are emotions, beliefs, opinions, and thoughts. We can validate suffering and difficulties. We can validate facts of the situation, but we want to make sure that we're only validating the valid, so not the invalid. So that means if somebody's feeling sad, you could validate by saying, I see that you're sad and I can understand that given what you're going through. However, if somebody's like, they maybe don't do as well in a work project and you hear them saying, I'm so stupid, I can't believe that I did this, I'm like just so stupid. You don't want to validate that the person is stupid. You don't want to say like, yes, you are. You want to say, I see that you're really struggling. I see that you're upset that this didn't go well. And then we have a lot of ways that we can validate. And it really is important that we use a fair amount of these, because if we do show understanding, but we're not, for example, looking at the person, attuning to the person, it will not feel so validating. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention, we're actively listening to the person. So that means not multitasking. We want to keep eye contact, and really turning our body towards the person can be very helpful. We can reflect back to the person what we hear. So if the person says, I'm feeling really angry right now, you can say exactly that. Say, I hear that you're feeling angry right now. And again, what that does is that communicates with that emotional part of the brain, and that emotional part of the brain feels heard. And when it feels heard, it can then settle a little bit. We can read minds, so we can kind of read between the lines and observe what's not being said. So this means paying attention to the other person. So let's say, for example, the person is sitting with the arms crossed, really tense, furrowed brow, tight, tense mouth. You could say, it seems that you're really angry right now. Is that correct? But we want to make sure, if we are reading minds, we do want to make sure that we are not assuming. So we do want to ask them, it seems that you're angry. Is that correct? A lot of times people don't take it well if we are just kind of putting our ideas on them without asking. We want to show understanding. So what this means is we are showing understanding for what the other person is going through or the person's behavior, and that's given their biology. Some people are naturally more biologically sensitive to emotions. Could be based on somebody's history. Something has happened that touched on something painful from the past, or it could be that whatever happened makes sense because maybe anybody would feel that way given the circumstances. We want to acknowledge what's valid in the moment, as we said before. And then finally, we want to show equality. So this means that we're not comparing ourselves or other people to that person. We don't want to one up or one down the person. We don't want to say things like, you know, some people have it so much worse. There are people starving. You have so much to be grateful for. You know, or even saying, you know, I went through something like this and it was so much worse and I made it through. Sometimes doing that kind of thing can actually interfere with that person feeling heard. So we want to show authenticity and our own humanness. And we want to avoid fragilizing the other person. And so the reasons behind this, we've kind of discussed this a bit, but why this is important is because it allows, as I said before, the emotional part of the brain to quiet. So emotions are here. They're biologically programmed into us and they serve important purposes. You know, one of them is to give us information, to give us data. And so when we speak to the emotion, the brain basically interprets, okay, information has been received, and then it is allowed to quiet and it reduces. It also shows that we're listening and we're understanding. It helps to reduce negative reactivity in other people. It actually makes problem solving more possible, and it makes that relationship with the person stronger generally. And finally, invalidation hurts. So even well-intended attempts to fix or kind of make things better, gloss them over, can actually feel hurtful to the other person. Okay, so now let's talk about de-escalating situations. So when we're talking about de-escalating a difficult situation, we're talking about a situation where there are high intensity emotions at play. So this could be somebody is intensely sad, angry, scared. And there are a few things that we really want to keep in mind when we're trying to de-escalate these situations. One is that we want to intervene, as early as possible, because the more intense the emotion becomes, the more difficult it becomes to de-escalate. So if we can kind of get in there and jump in early rather than later, we're going to be more effective. We want to validate first. So I can't stress that enough. It's very important. We want to validate first to allow the person to feel heard, to speak to that emotional part of the brain. And we want to do that for long enough so that we see that emotion settle before we try to add in any kind of problem solving with the person. We want to use those give skills that we talked about before. We want to try to stay calm and positive and confident. And we want to make sure to maintain our own self-regulation and our own emotion regulation here. So breathing can be a really helpful thing to do. Know that it's okay to pause and breathe in these difficult situations. In fact, taking a moment to pause and take a breath before you speak can sometimes make a huge difference. We want to avoid being passive or overly confrontational, and we want to refrain from showing our anger. That tends to just make the situation much more intense. And we want to give the person space. So especially if there is anger involved, if there's high intensity anger, we do want to give the person space, avoid touching, getting too close, or ask the person to move to a more private area. As I said before, we want to stay with validation until we see the person's emotion reduce. So usually this is staying with the validation longer than feels comfortable with us, for us. So it's staying, I get that you're feeling upset. I understand that. This must be really hard for you. And we want to stay there, and you will see it start to settle generally. And then you can ask them how you can best help. So do they need help with problem solving? Do they just need you to listen? And you can use the dear man to effectively suggest stepping away or having another solution if needed. I'm going to give you an example of this in just a minute. But remember, trying to problem solve with somebody who has high intensity emotions generally will not be possible, and it tends to make things worse. So these are some other things that tend to make things worse. As I said before, trying to fix or problem solve, invalidating the struggle. So common things that people say: don't be sad, don't cry, you have so much to be grateful for. So a lot of times these are well-intended responses, and they're often an attempt to help the person feel better, to help the emotion shift, but it tends to really feel invalidating and may actually increase emotion. We want to stay away from blaming and judgmental statements. You know, this is all your fault. If only you would think differently. If only you would do this. We want to stay away from should statements. If you were a good person, you would do this. And we want to stay away from, moralizing statements like that too. And refraining from criticism. This really just does not help the situation. When we're talking about de-escalating, it's more about what is going to be effective as opposed to being right. So, often those attempts and those attempts to problem solve or fix a situation may be spot on. They may be right and they may be helpful. However, if we deliver them when the person is highly emotional, it will not help the situation. So I wanted to give you an example of that dear man kind of in action with a difficult situation. So I'm using the example of colleagues, and there's a colleague who is asking something of you that you are unwilling or incapable of giving to the person. And as you say no, the person is not respecting the no, and they're becoming more angry. They're starting to become insulting, criticizing, more aggressive. And so this is using dear man to step away from the conversation. But you can use this in a number of different ways. So we initially want to start by describing the situation. So, if we have already been in the situation and it's not working, we can describe that, right? You keep asking me over and over again. And although I've already told you that I can't several times, right? So you're describing the situation that's happening right now. We want to stay away from, you obviously don't care about what I have to say. You obviously don't love me. You're being ridiculous. Okay. Obviously those kind of things are not going to help, but they are natural and they can come out pretty easily. We want to then express our feelings and opinions about it. For example, if the interaction is not going well, express your feelings of discomfort. Tell them how it feels to you. An example: I'm sorry I cannot do what you're asking me, and I'm finding it really difficult to keep discussing this. Or I'm feeling really uncomfortable to keep talking about this, and I'm starting to feel angry about it. So we want to use that instead of I can't take this, I hate you, stop patronizing me. And then we want to assert what we want in the situation. So, if a situation is really escalating, things are not going well, you may want to ask that you step away from the conversation and, you reconvene at a later time. So an example here: please don't ask me again. My answer will continue to be no. Or let's take a break and cool down. Then we can reconvene later to discuss a solution. So we don't want to say, would you just shut up? You should do this. You really need to calm down and do the right thing. Again, those things don't really tend to help. And then finally, we want to reinforce the person. So we want to tell them what's in it for them. Tell them why it may be helpful to stop the conversation, to step away for a moment. So for example, let's stop talking about this for now. I'm not going to change my answer. And I think that this is going to continue to frustrate us. Okay, I understand that you don't want to do this. So let's figure out something else that you may be more willing to do. Right. So these are examples. We're telling the other person what's in it for them. Let's stop now because this is not going to keep working. So we want to do that instead of, if you don't do this for me, I'll never do anything for you again. It's a threat, or you're a terrible person for not doing this for me. So, criticism, moralizing. So this is it all together. I wanted to just kind of break it down for you all together. So again, the situation, the colleague is asking for something, you keep saying no, and the person's becoming more aggressive. So all put together, you keep asking me over and over again, although I've already told you that I can't several times. I'm feeling really uncomfortable to keep talking about this, and I'm starting to feel angry about it. Let's take a break and cool down. Then we can reconvene later to discuss a solution. Let's stop talking about this for now. I'm not going to change my answer. And I think this is just going to continue to frustrate us. So that's the whole, request together. I'm asking to step away. And then what we want to do is just be ready for their responses. So again, this is maintaining that broken record. If the person attacks or threatens or tries to change the subject, it's coming back. Right? If the person, again, starts to become critical or aggressive, I hear that you're upset and I'm not going to change my answer. I think that we need to step away right now because this is not going to move in a positive direction. Again, we want to maintain our confidence, not become aggressive ourselves, and then negotiate if we want. In this kind of situation, sometimes turning the tables can be the most effective thing. So if the person continues to insist on you doing the thing or doesn't want to step away, you can say to the person, I see that this conversation is not going in a positive direction and I need to step away right now. You don't seem to be respecting that request. So I'm wondering what you suggest that we do. So you turn it over to the other person and get them to come up with the decision. Many times this when the person comes up with their solution by themselves, they tend to be more accepting of it and willing to do it. And then finally, when we're talking about this, a few things that we want to keep in mind. Stepping away may sometimes be the most effective thing that we can do when it comes to de-escalating. Sometimes, even with effective communication, the situation may maintain, heated, and stepping away can help. If you do step away with a plan to come back, make sure that you spend that time, yourself quieting your own emotions, maintaining focus on your goals, and thinking about, how you want to respond when you return, how you can be effective when you reconvene. Also, if you are somebody who has difficulty stepping away, or you want to try this, sometimes this is not easy to do. Especially for people who are close to you in your life, it can be really helpful to tell the person that you want to step away first. Tell them that you're trying this so that, situations do not become heated or, become ineffective, or things are not said that are regretted. So telling the people beforehand can be really helpful. And tell them what's in it for them, why this is going to be helpful for them, for you to step away. So here are a few concluding statements, and then I'm going to pass it over to Deneen Waslick. So essentially, mental health problems are quite common. They are growing in our country and in the world. And so learning how to effectively address those concerns are important. And learning effective interpersonal communication skills to address them will allow for, your requests, your statements to them, your concerns to be heard. Using Dear Man and Give skills to address these mental health concerns is really important, especially using validation to help quiet emotional intensity. And then finally, please make sure to reach out to a licensed mental health professional for more guidance if you feel that you need some in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. And I think that I need you to unshare your screen for me to share mine so I can move forward with this. Hopefully, everything that Dr. Jones has told us will be enough that you never get in the unenviable situation of having to be in the position of deciding whether or not you have to actually make any sort of report to the bar on these issues. Hopefully these dear man skills that we're working on will be enough. But we did want to make sure, because there are some unique kind of things that that lawyers face ethically, that you have the tools available to you to sort of know where to look in the rules and what to be looking at if you think you're getting to a point where there may well be a situation where you might have to make some sort of report. And really, there are 3 rules that sort of interrelate and come into play when you're making these decisions. They are 4-8.3, which is the rule on making reports, 4-1.6, which is the rule on confidentiality, and 4-3.4, which is the rule on fairness. I'm just going to go over a little bit of each of them right now. And the most important one that sort of applies here is 4-8.3 on reporting professional misconduct. As lawyers, we do have an obligation to report misconduct, and I'm really going to highlight some of the, what the exact test is, and that is if we believe that there's been a violation of the rules that raises, quote, a substantial question about honesty, trustworthiness, or fitness of a lawyer, and then we must inform the appropriate professional authority. That is really, really strong language. And of course, like many things, lawyerly, there's a lot of room for interpretation on that. One thing that kind of tempers that is part C here. The rule does not require disclosure of information otherwise protected by rule 4-1.6, and that's the confidentiality rule that governs confidentiality for your clients. And so if you are in a situation where in order to make a report, you are going to potentially have to reveal confidential information, including the bar considers even the fact that you represent someone to be confidential without their express permission to state that, then you need your client's consent, or the best practice is to have your client's consent if you're going to make any such report. However, there are sort of emergent exceptions as well. Let me go back for just a second. The 4-1.6 is that important consent rule. And the important exceptions to that are if you think there is your client is going to be committing a crime, or you have to prevent death or substantially bodily harm to another. Now, if you believe that a colleague is in a situation where they are going to cause death or substantial bodily harm to another, then you're sort of out of waiting to get consent from your client, and you're into calling 911 territory. So that is the urgent time where you really have to make a call. I hope you are never, ever, ever in that situation. But other than that, it's really there's a lot of discretion as to whether a report is necessary. And note that you have the must, and then you have the mays of when you can, you may reveal information, and most of those are self-protective. Like if you've got a controversy with the client, if it serves the client's interest, then you can reveal it, as long as the client has not specifically requested otherwise. But again, we're not really talking about the client's interest here. We're talking about whether or not a colleague or a client, mostly a colleague in this situation, is suffering from something severe enough that you feel you have to report it. And the last piece that is also important to keep in mind is that, you can't use the notion that you have an obligation to report as a tool to gain advantage in litigation. That is specifically set forth in 4-3.4 that you can't use these disciplinary proceedings to obtain an advantage. And so, if you're in a situation where you have a true and genuine concern about the health or well-being of a colleague, and you've gone through all these de-escalation tools, and it's getting to an urgent state, then you may well have to report if you see that there is a chance for self-harm, or if you see that the person is causing harm to their clients because of their issues. And what does that look like if you do have to report? Well, first of all, if there's an issue of harm that's urgent, then you really, if it's urgent enough to call someone, like call 911 or something like that, you need to, do that if that's what you really think that's what's going on. If, that is in some ways the hardest situation to be in some ways the easiest, because if it's that clear that it's that emergent, then you can, make that phone call and hopefully you're doing the right thing. When it's non-emergent and you're having a harder time deciding whether or not you're in the position where you have to make some sort of report, one tool available is to call the Florida Ethics Hotline. I've put the number on the screen. It's also on the bar's website. You can always just Google Florida Ethics Hotline. But I actually have put that number in my phone because I've called it multiple times just to say, hey, am I just reading this right? I mean, even honestly, preparing for this, I called them to say, hey, am I reading this right? And they can be very, very helpful in pointing you in the right direction on which rules to be looking at to determine whether you're reading it right, help you sort of decide whether you're making a close call or not. There's also locally the professionalism panels, and that is circuit by circuit. Some circuits are more active than others at the moment. In fact, our current Florida Bar President, Gary Lesser, is working on sort of upgrading the rules for the professionalism panels to try and have them be a little bit more uniform in the way they're dealt with from circuit to circuit. But the idea is that there are some rules for basically reaching out something short of a full-on, bar complaint, which can potentially be a helpful intervention if there's, if someone is going down a road and your dear man skills aren't working, that maybe you can help keep them from getting to the point where they're in trouble with the bar by making a phone call to a professionalism panel. There are 2 Florida Supreme Court rules, decisions that sort of govern the rules for how those work. And it's basically you call the panel and they do a little bit of sort of an intervention, and sometimes they will decide that they have to escalate and call, and make a full-on formal grievance. But the goal is to sort of nip problems in the bud before they become something that is going to be so difficult that affects the person's ability to practice law. So that is something that is an option out there. If you feel like you kind of have to report, but you're hoping to not, keep the person from going entirely, into trouble, because sometimes, dealing with those kinds of issues can make things worse instead of better. Those professionalism panels are available, but, some of the best things that you can do is, know the tools that are available when you're going through your, dear man checklist. If you want to offer some ideas and things that are available, I have found in talking to colleagues that a lot of folks just don't know that the bar has some of the tools that it has available to get help and to help each other. And so I just think it's really important for us to all be aware of them. The Florida Lawyers Helpline is a big one. That image there, this is basically think of it as like an employer assistance program, but for lawyers. And so you don't have to work for a big firm to have access to this. Anyone who is a lawyer in the state of Florida can call the helpline, and you basically get connected with a certain number of free counseling sessions. And the only thing that is reported to the bar is demographics of, we had a female 45 call, just so they know that they're serving a number of people, but no names are ever reported to the bar. It's entirely confidential as far as making these phone calls. And so if you or a colleague just don't even know where to start to get a little, extra mental health support, the Lawyers Helpline is a great tool because it will get you hooked up with a licensed mental health counselor who can sort of get you started with talking to someone and help, you know, resolve early issues and get you down a path of getting more help that you need. On the bar's website, under the Health and Wellness Center page, which I've linked up there, there is more information about the Lawyers Helpline, and also many, many other resources. I mean, the bar has really in the past couple of years tried to provide a lot of other resources, including things like reduced fees for joining the YMCA, reduced fees for using a meditation app, all of these tools that, you know, we've been learning through this wonderful series with Dr. Jones and others that we really should be hopefully utilizing to keep ourselves grounded. The bar's trying to help us get access to those tools in an affordable way. So be sure to check that out. And also there's all sorts of links to various, I would call them sort of specialty crisis hotlines, from suicide awareness to judges helping judges. There's a whole bunch of different options, both nationally and locally, listed on that page. If you just don't quite know where to start, definitely consider taking a look at that. So, you know, those are the rules and those are the basic guidelines. Again, hopefully you never have to be in this situation where you have to make a report. But, you know, if you are beyond the interaction, you think that there's something that there's a real danger, and, you know, then it's either a 911 situation, which hopefully you're never in, or perhaps consider reaching out to a professionals and panel. Make sure that you're doing it for pure reasons and not for advantage in your litigation. Sometimes clients can be all about, you know, let's bury them, and that is not really helpful or ethical to do. What is helpful and ethical is helping your colleagues make sure that they're approaching things in an ethical manner themselves. So with that, I don't know that I see any questions. Does anybody have any questions, particularly for Dr. Jones on this, or any other follow-up that they would like to ask? I'm not seeing any. I think we've solved all the world's problems, Dr. Jones.
Wonderful.
But in all seriousness, thank you so much. Those tools are super, super helpful, and I definitely appreciate you taking the time to share them with us.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Thank you, Deneen. Thank you to all our participants today. It was an excellent, very informative presentation. Hope everybody got a lot out of it. And I want to commend the Florida Bar Business Law section for putting on these programs. I think this is very important, and today's session was tremendously informative. So thank you both today, and thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you, Judge. And I'll also just add very quickly, if you go to the Business Law section's website, the first two in this series are listed both under the CLE tab and under the Health and Wellness Task Force tab, available on demand to play. And so, you know, if you got a lot out of today, but you haven't seen the past, you can actually go back and get those as well. And they are also approved for 1 credit of CLE and 1 credit of mental health CLE as well. So thank you all for coming and for participating. Again, to Dr. Jones, who's really been the driving force in putting together this fabulous series of programs.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.